Laughter echoed from the corner of the room. A waiter in a worn shirt was pushed toward table 7, where a young woman sat silent in a wheelchair, her white dress shimmering under yellow lights. "Sit down. Tonight's game is just a blind date," his coworker whispered, stifling a laugh. He bowed his head, unaware they were recording. "I'm sorry, I'm just staff here." The woman looked up, her eyes sad as winter water. "Is that so? Well then, today I'm your guest." None of them knew. This prank would change 2 lives forever. Ethan Hale was 34 years old. He worked as a server at Le Ciel Bleu, a restaurant downtown, wiping tables, carrying trays, smiling politely at customers who never remembered his name. Widowed 3 years ago, living with his 7-year-old son, Leo, in a cramped rental apartment on the outskirts of the city, where the walls were thin and the heating barely worked in winter. Every morning he walked Leo to school, holding his small hand across busy streets, past the bakery that smelled like warm butter, past the park where other kids played with both parents watching. Every night he washed dishes until his fingers pruned, then stayed late for the graveyard shift to cover tuition fees, medical bills, and the rent that kept climbing every year. Ethan was gentle, quiet, the kind of man people overlooked. His co-workers teased him about his hunched posture, his worn-out shoes, the way he never talked back, never complained, never asked for anything. "Hey, Ethan, still wearing those shoes from the thrift store?" They'd laugh, he'd smile, say nothing, keep working. One evening, the staff decided to prank him. They signed him up for a blind date event the restaurant was hosting, calling it Manager's Fun Night to get him to agree. Marcus, the sous chef, clapped him on the back. "Come on, man, you need to get out there. Meet someone." Ethan hesitated. "I don't know. I have Leo to think about." "Just one night," Marcus insisted. "What's the harm?" What Ethan didn't know was that they'd already picked his date, someone they thought would make the whole thing hilarious. When Ethan approached table 7 that evening, Clara Morgan appeared, 30 years old, dressed in a white gown that looked expensive, seated in a wheelchair, her face beautiful but cold, her hands folded perfectly in her lap. She was the CEO of Morgan Interiors, a renowned interior design company worth millions. Though few people knew her story, 3 years ago, a car accident on a rainy highway took away her ability to walk, and took away the man she was supposed to marry, who died on impact. The group of servers giggled near the bar, phones out, live streaming the joke to their group chat. "This is going to be gold," one of them whispered. Ethan didn't know. He only saw a woman sitting alone, and he bowed politely. "Good evening. What would you like to order?" Clara looked at him, really looked at him. "I'd like to talk, if you don't mind." He awkwardly sat down, planning to leave after a few minutes, glancing nervously at the bar where his co-workers watched. But she asked, "Do you think people can live without being pitied?" The question caught him off guard. He thought about Leo, about the way teachers looked at them during parent conferences, about the neighbors who whispered when they passed. He answered softly, "I think people just want to be seen as human, not as their struggles." The air went still. Clara's expression shifted. Something in her eyes softened. The group at the bar lost interest, turned off their phones, wandered away to gossip about something else. As Ethan stood to leave, he accidentally dropped a worn handkerchief from his pocket, embroidered with the crooked letters LH in blue thread. Made by his son in craft class, a gift for Father's Day. Clara picked it up, staring at the uneven stitching, the small stains, the frayed edges. She clenched it gently in her hand, feeling the weight of something real. A child's embroidered handkerchief with LH, a symbol of simple sincerity. The next morning, Ethan was scrubbing pots in the kitchen when the security guard called him to the front. "Package for you," to the guard said, handing him a small wrapped box. Inside was the handkerchief, and a note written in elegant handwriting. "You left behind your kindness. I'm only returning it." Below that, an invitation card to Lumiere Cafe, owned by Morgan Interiors. Ethan stood there, water dripping from his rubber gloves, staring at the card. Marcus peered over his shoulder. "Dude, is that from the wheelchair lady?" Ethan said nothing. But that evening after his shift, he went. The cafe was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows, plants hanging from the ceiling, soft jazz playing in the background. He sat in the corner feeling out of place in his old jacket and faded jeans. She appeared 20 minutes later, wearing a cream sweater, hair tied loosely, no longer the cold presence from that night. A staff member helped position her wheelchair across from him. "Do you know they recorded that evening?" she asked without preamble. Ethan nodded slowly. "I heard. Marcus told me this morning. He felt bad about it." "And," she pressed, "are you angry?" He shook his head. "I'm not angry, but I feel sorry for them. Thinking humiliating others is entertainment." The answer made Clara smile for the first time, a real smile that reached her eyes. She ordered 2 coffees and asked about his son. He told her, his voice soft with affection, "Leo loves drawing houses with big windows, so his mom can see the skate. He thinks she's up there watching." Clara fell silent, her eyes glistening. She looked down at her hands. "My fiancé died in the same accident that put me here. Sometimes I wonder if he's watching too." They sat in that shared grief, not trying to fix it, just acknowledging it. After a long pause, Clara said, "I'd like to meet Leo, if that's okay." Ethan was surprised, but he agreed. The following Saturday, he brought Leo to Morgan Interior's headquarters. The boy's eyes went wide at the marble floors, the glass elevators, the wall-sized design boards. Clara wheeled out of her office, and Leo, without prompting, bowed politely the way his father taught him. "Thank you for inviting us, ma'am. I'll draw a house with a ramp so you can climb it." She burst into laughter, genuine, unguarded laughter that echoed through the hallway. For the first time in years, she felt seen through a child's eyes, not through pity, not through awkwardness, but through simple kindness. "Would you like to help me bake cookies?" she asked. Leo nodded enthusiastically. They moved to the company's test kitchen, used for designing residential kitchen layouts. Ethan helped Clara teach Leo how to measure flour, crack eggs, fold in chocolate chips. All 3 laughed when flour exploded across the counter, when Leo sneezed into the bowl, when the first batch came out burnt and they ate them anyway, declaring them perfectly crispy. Clara felt something she hadn't felt since before the accident. Joy. Simple, uncomplicated joy. That afternoon, Leo made a drawing with crayons Clara provided. A house with a ramp and 3 people smiling. He stuck it on her office fridge with a magnet. Clara touched the paper, feeling the waxy texture of the crayon, seeing the crooked lines and the stick figures with enormous smiles. She cried, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being seen as more than her wheelchair. Over the following weeks, Clara invited them back again and again. They cooked together, walked through her rooftop garden, talked about favorite colors, childhood memories, embarrassing moments. One evening, Leo fell asleep on the leather couch in her office, exhausted from running around the rooftop. Ethan covered him with his jacket. Clara watched from her wheelchair, her expression soft. "He looks so peaceful." "He is," Ethan said quietly. "He doesn't ask for much, just someone to be there." She looked down at her hands, tracing the armrest of her wheelchair. "I used to think being there wasn't enough, that I had to be strong, successful, perfect. That weakness was failure. And now I think maybe being there is everything. Maybe showing up, even when you're tired or broken, is the bravest thing anyone can do." Ethan smiled gently. Clara reached into her desk drawer, pulled out the handkerchief he'd dropped that first night. "I kept this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "It reminded me that some people give without expecting anything back. That kindness doesn't need a reason." He shook his head. "I didn't give anything special. I just saw you as a person, not as a CEO or a wheelchair or a tragic story." Her voice cracked. "No one's done that in a long time." And they sat in silence. The kind of silence that feels like understanding, like 2 people recognizing something broken in each other and choosing not to look away. Before leaving, Leo woke up groggily and, still half asleep, hugged Clara around the neck. "Can we come back tomorrow?" he mumbled. She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. Always. You can always come back. After they left, Clara sat alone in her office, holding the drawing Leo had made, staring at the three smiling stick figures. For the first time since the accident, she didn't feel alone. Leo's messy drawing with cookie dough stains, a symbol of genuine bond. It happened on a Tuesday morning. The video of the blind date prank leaked online, posted by someone who'd saved it from the group chat. Within hours, it went viral. Tabloids picked it up. Disabled CEO dating poor waiter. Inspirational or desperate? You decide. Morgan Interior CEO Clara Morgan spotted with restaurant staff. The comments section exploded with cruelty. She's so desperate, she's dating the help? He's obviously using her for money. This is what happens when CEOs lose touch with reality. Clara's phone buzzed nonstop. Emails from board members, messages from shareholders, calls from PR demanding an emergency meeting. She sat in her office, staring at the screen, reading every hateful word. Ethan saw the video at the restaurant. Marcus showed it to him reluctantly. Man, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it would blow up like this. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Not for himself, but for Clara, for Leo, for the peaceful moments they'd built together now exposed and twisted. He immediately requested a leave of absence, even though his salary was his only lifeline, even though rent was due in a week. I can't let her lose everything because of me, he told Marcus. He didn't answer Clara's calls, didn't want to make things worse. But she kept calling. Finally, she sent a text, "Come to my office, please." When he arrived that evening, the building was nearly empty. He took the elevator to the top floor, walked slowly down the hall. Through the glass walls of her office, he saw someone else there. Nathan Cole, tall, sharp-suited, cold eyes, designer watch gleaming. Clara's ex-fiancé, the man who was driving the night of the accident, the man who walked away without a scratch, the man who left her 2 weeks after she got out of the hospital because he couldn't handle being a caretaker. Ethan hesitated, but Clara saw him through the glass and waved him in. Nathan turned, his expression dripping with disdain. "Ah, the waiter." Ethan said nothing. Nathan continued, his voice sharp. "You're being foolish, Clara. The whole company is laughing at you. The board is questioning your judgment. All because of this charity case." Clara's jaw tightened. "You left me when I was in the hospital, Nathan, when I needed someone most. The only person who stayed is the one you're calling a charity case." Nathan slammed a thick contract on the desk. "Then let's be practical. I'm offering a merger. Cole Enterprises and Morgan Interiors. We'd be unstoppable, but the board won't approve it if you keep embarrassing yourself publicly." He slid a pen across the desk. "Choose. The company's future or this pathetic distraction." Ethan stepped forward quietly, placed his employee badge from the restaurant on the desk next to the contract. "I'm returning this. I quit this morning," he said softly. "I don't want anyone to lose their job or their company because of me." He set down a paper bag. Inside were burnt cookies he and Leo had made that morning, in Leo's latest drawing. "I'm sorry for any trouble I caused." Clara's hands trembled. She looked at the burnt cookies, at Leo's drawing of the three of them, at Nathan's contract, at the pen. Her breathing quickened. Nathan leaned forward. "Be smart, Clara. Sign it. Move on." She looked up at him, then at Ethan, who stood there with his worn shoes and his quiet dignity. She picked up the pen. Nathan smiled. She threw it across the room. "I choose the person who knows how to love, not the person who knows how to count profits." Nathan's smile vanished. "You'll regret this. The board will remove you. You'll lose everything." Clara's voice was steady now. "I already lost everything once. I know what that feels like. And I know what it feels like to have something real again. I'm not giving that up for a company that doesn't value people." Nathan stood furious, grabbing his briefcase. Before leaving, he threw a set of keys on the desk. Keys to the penthouse they were supposed to share. The symbol of the life they'd planned. "Keep living in your fantasy," he spat, See how long kindness pays your bills. The door slammed behind him. Silence filled the office. Clara stared at the keys. Expensive, heavy, cold. She picked them up and wheeled toward Ethan. Come with me. They took the elevator down, crossed the lobby, went out to the company's rooftop garden. It was dark, the city lights glowing below them, the air cool and quiet. Clara stopped near an empty flower bed. Can you help me plant something here? Ethan nodded, confused but willing. He found a shovel in the storage shed. She used a small trowel. Together they dug into the soil, dirt getting under their fingernails, the smell of earth rising around them. Clara held the keys for a long moment, then dropped them into the hole. What once locked me in will now become a seed. They covered the keys with earth, patted it down gently, then Clara pulled a small sapling from a nearby pot and planted it on top. Ethan looked at her, his face full of questions. She met his eyes. I'm tired of living for things that don't matter. Tired of proving myself to people who only see my value when I'm useful to them. Her voice broke slightly. You and Leo, you see me. Just me. And that's worth more than any merger, any penthouse, any approval from people who abandoned me when I needed them. Ethan knelt beside her wheelchair, his hand resting gently on hers. Are you sure? You could lose everything. She smiled through tears. I already have everything that matters. That night, Leo asked his father, is Miss Clara okay? Ethan kissed his forehead, tucking him into bed. She's better than okay, buddy. She's free. Leo smiled sleepily. Good, because I like her. She laughs at my jokes. Ethan chuckled softly. Yeah, me too. Penthouse keys buried in the earth, becoming a seed of freedom. The backlash hit immediately. 2 board members resigned in protest. 3 major clients pulled their contracts. The business press ran stories. Morgan's poor judgment, and CEO chooses love over logic. But Clara didn't flinch. She called an emergency staff meeting the next morning, wheeled herself to the front of the conference room, everyone staring. I know you've seen the news. I know some of you are worried, she began, but I want to tell you what we're really going to do. She pulled up a presentation on the screen. We're launching Rise Garden, a green workspace and community center designed for people with disabilities. Free design consultations, accessible architecture, job training programs. Murmurs rippled through the room. I know it's risky. I know it's not what shareholders want, but it's what I want. And if you want to stay and build something meaningful, I'd be honored to have you. Half the room left that day, but half stayed, and slowly others joined. Ethan became the manager of the community kitchen, a space where people could learn to cook, share meals, build skills. Leo designed the logo with Clara's help, a hand lifting a small green sprout. Construction began within a month. Ethan worked long hours, planning menus, sourcing ingredients, training volunteers. Clara worked alongside him, reviewing designs, meeting with contractors, doing physical therapy in the mornings before anyone else arrived. She was determined to walk again. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to prove to herself that she wasn't defined by limitations. Every morning at 6, a physical therapist named Diane came to the office. Clara practiced standing, holding on to parallel bars, her legs shaking with effort. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30. Ethan often arrived early, watching quietly from the doorway, never interrupting, just present. One morning she stood for a full minute. When she sat back down, exhausted and drenched in sweat, Ethan handed her water. You're stronger than you think, he said simply. She smiled, catching her breath. I had good reasons to try. Weeks passed. The garden took shape. Pathways wide enough for wheelchairs, raised garden beds at accessible heights, ramps instead of stairs. On opening day, rain fell lightly, but Clara insisted they proceed. Staff, volunteers, and neighbors gathered under umbrellas and canopies. They planted trees, herbs, flowers. Leo ran around with the other kids, his hands covered in mud, his laughter ringing out. Clara wheeled through the wet ground, her chair leaving tracks in the soft earth, and she didn't care. She felt alive. That afternoon, the garden officially opened to the public. People came from all over the city, some in wheelchairs, some with canes, some with invisible disabilities, all looking for a place that didn't make them feel like burdens. Clara gave a short speech from her wheelchair, her voice strong despite the rain. We're not building a workplace. We're building a place to start again. A place where your value isn't measured by what you can do, but by who you are. The crowd applauded, some wiping tears. Ethan stood in the back, holding Leo's hand, watching Clara glow under the gray sky and string lights. Afterward, Leo tugged on Clara's sleeve. Are you two going to get married? Ethan's face turned red. Leo, Clara laughed, a real belly laugh. If we're not ready, we'll just wait. She looked at the small tree they'd planted over the buried keys. It had sprouted tiny green leaves. She whispered, until it blooms. Over the following weeks, Rise Garden became a refuge. People came to work, to learn, to rest, to belong. Ethan's kitchen served meals daily. Simple, hearty food that reminded people of home. Clara continued her physical therapy, standing longer each day, taking small steps with support, refusing to give up. One morning, she stood without the bars for 2 full minutes. When she sat back down, trembling but proud, Ethan was there with water and a towel. You did it, he said softly. She smiled, exhausted. We did it. Leo burst into the therapy room, covered in dirt from the garden. The flower's about to open. They rushed outside. Well, Clara wheeled quickly, Ethan and Leo jogging beside her. The tree planted over the buried keys had a single white bud, just beginning to unfurl. Clara stopped her chair beneath it, reached up and touched the rough bark. It really grew, she whispered, her voice full of wonder. Ethan stood beside her. Things grow when you stop forcing them, when you give them space and time. She looked up at him. Is that what you did? Stopped forcing? I just let things be what they are. Let people be who they are. That evening, the three of them sat under the tree. Watching the sun set through the leaves, the city sounds fading into background hum. Leo fell asleep between them, his head on Clara's lap. Ethan pulled his jacket over the boy. Clara rested her hand on Leo's hair, stroking it gently, then reached over and took Ethan's hand. Thank you, she said, barely audible. For what? For seeing me when I couldn't see myself. For staying when everyone else left. For showing me what love actually looks like. Ethan squeezed her hand. You gave us a home. A real one. That's more than I ever hoped for. They sat in silence as stars began to appear, the tree's white bud finally opening into a small, perfect flower. A sprout growing from where the keys were buried, Clara breaking free from her past. 6 months later, early morning sunlight poured through the kitchen windows of Rise Gardens Community Center. Ethan baked bread, the smell filling every corner of the building, drawing people out of their rooms and offices. Leo sat at the counter doing homework, occasionally sneaking pieces of dough when his father wasn't looking. Clara watered plants on the balcony, moving slowly but standing, gripping a cane in one hand, watering can in the other. The tree where they'd buried the keys now had dozens of white flowers blooming, petals falling like snow onto the ground. Clara finished watering and looked at Leo's newest drawing pinned to the bulletin board. 3 people under a tree. Crooked letters spelling, "Our home, Mum." She touched the paper gently, tracing the wobbly lines, the bright colors, the happiness radiating from every mark. Then she walked inside, slowly, carefully, her cane tapping against the floor. Ethan looked up from the oven, his face lighting up. You walked all the way from the balcony? She smiled, slightly breathless. I did. Leo jumped off his stool and hugged her legs. You're getting so good. She laughed, steadying herself. I have good motivation. Sitting down at the table, Clara looked at both of them. Ethan with flour on his cheek, Leo with pencil smudges on his fingers. I've been thinking, she said softly. I think I've found the place I want to stay. Ethan wiped his hands on his apron, then sat across from her. If you and Leo still need me, I'll always be here. Clara reached up, removed the key-shaped necklace she'd worn since before the accident. The last gift Nathan had given her, the last piece of her old life. She'd kept it as a reminder. But now she didn't need reminders of what she'd lost. She stood again, walked slowly back outside, Leo and Ethan following. She hung the necklace on a branch of the blooming tree, where it caught the sunlight and swayed gently in the breeze. "Now it's truly open," she whispered. Ethan stood beside her, his hand finding hers naturally. "Family isn't where you're born," Clara said, her voice steady and sure. "It's where you choose to be, and keep choosing, every single day." Leo shouted from the garden entrance, "Oh, Miss Clara, more flowers are blooming." They turned to see the entire tree covered in white blossoms, petals drifting down like gentle snow. Clara took a step forward without her cane, then another, until she stood beneath the tree with Leo, petals landing in her hair. Ethan joined them, wrapping his arms around both. They stood there, imperfect, still healing, still figuring things out. But home, not because everything was fixed, but because they chose each other every single day. The morning light grew warmer. People began arriving at the garden, greeting them, starting their day. Clara looked at Ethan. "Ready?" He smiled. "Always." Together they walked inside to start breakfast service, Leo running ahead to help set tables. And the tree bloomed on, petals falling softly on the ground where something broken had been buried and something beautiful had grown instead. Not perfect, not healed completely, but real. And that was enough. If you believe healing stories like this deserve to be told, leave a comment below and subscribe to Strong Dad Stories. We tell the stories that shouldn't be forgotten. The quiet acts of courage, the small choices that change everything, the people who stay when everyone else walks away. Because sometimes the most powerful transformations happen in the smallest, most unexpected moments. Join us. Let's keep telling these stories together.